Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ask 5. My name is Monica Molinaro, and today I am joined by Karen. Karen, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm Gwen Moniz. I'm a PhD candidate at the IHSE. I'm also an adjunct assistant professor and former director of faculty development at the University of Alberta Department of Family Medicine.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share the question that we asked our 5 for this episode.
Yes, of course. How do you speak to different audiences about your research ideas?
It's a really good question. Let's see what our 5 had to say.
Perfect.
Carlos Gomez-Garibello. I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Health Sciences Education at McGill University. I also are an associate member for the Department of Surgery and the assessment lead for postgraduate medical education, all of those affiliations at McGill University.
Beth Cummings. I'm an associate member of the Institute of Health Sciences Education and an associate professor in general internal medicine in the Department of Medicine.
Hi, I'm Farhan. My evenings, nights, and weekends job is that I'm a pediatric intensive care physician at the Montreal Children's Hospital, McGill University Health Center. I'm an associate member at the IHSE at McGill, and my other job is that I am the Director of Assessment and Certification / Examiner-in-Chief at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada.
Hi, I'm Darusha Naidu. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but currently I'm Canada Research Chair in Equity and Social Justice in Global Medical Education at the University of Ottawa. And I'm a South African.
Aliki Thomas. I am an occupational therapist by clinical background, so that's many, many, many years ago. But I am now an associate professor in the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill University. I also hold an appointment at the Institute of Health Sciences Education in the same faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at McGill. And I am also a researcher at the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Rehabilitation, so one of the largest rehab research centers in the country. I think that's who I am.
How do you speak to different audiences about your research ideas?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I think that if you want to really to disseminate your research findings, and especially in the context of health professional education, I think that you need to use a language that is accessible to the stakeholders, right? And when I say that, it's like, for example, I work a lot with physicians who are teachers of residents, right? And I know that if I use grandiose language, right, like that word grandiose, and the formative assessment, and, like these big words, psychometrics and properties and all of these things, so people are going to be lost in the translation, and they are going to miss what is the idea that what I have to say. So I think that the more that I go into this world of academics, I think that the more that I think that we need to be balanced, right? We need to really to play by the game that is academics, that is like requires certain type of communication. But I think that we also need to remember that all this kind of research that we are doing is not on atoms, it's not on proteins, it's not on enzymes, but it's actually with humans. And those humans deserve to know, or not deserve, I think that they will benefit a lot from knowing what is it that we are finding from their interactions on, how to teach better, how to assess better, how to address issues like moral distress. So I think that we need to have that kind of a translation back to our stakeholders or the participants in our research endeavors.
And from there, then, what about general audiences? If you were to kind of put your research out into the world for the general public, how does tailoring the writing or the communication of that research differ?
I think that the world has evolved. I think that we still think that writing like an executive summary with the results of our research that are like late summary, that we are not using this academic grandiose language. I'm still using the grandiose like.
It's a good word.
I love it.
It's great.
It's good. Anyways, but I don't think that is that. It's like using like other ways to communicate your results of your research. Something that I found fascinating is, for example, I can name to the top of my head two of things that I think that quite interesting. One are infographics. I think that infographics are amazing. I think that is a lot of a cognitive exercise in order to synthesize the results of any research or any idea that you have in a way that is actually represented with some sort of a graphic, with some sort of a diagram. And I think that that's quite powerful, because again, it's really helping people to understand what is it that you are saying, right? The other thing that I have found that is extremely interesting is this exercise that they do at Amy that is called Pecha Kucha.
Are they the timed ones? It's like 7 minutes or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's 1 minute per slide. I think that that's fascinating because it really, really, really forces you to be really extremely precise with what is it what you want to say, what is it that you privilege when you are talking, and really synthesizing. And again, I'm using the word synthesis again, right? So I think that we need to really take all those ideas that we have, all those findings that we have from our research, from our projects, and really to put it in a way that is understandable to our audience. And our audiences now are becoming more and more visual, right? We're in a culture that is now really obsessed with social media, and not the social media that probably we like as academics, which is Twitter or X, right? At some point, everybody was obsessed with X, right? Or Twitter, right? And Twitter this and that, whatever. But now I think that, for example, learners, they are using Instagram, they are using TikTok, they are using other varieties of social media. And we as academics are really behind that. And I don't think that this means to trivialize or to make things like infantilize or to get away like the gravitas that comes from research, but it's more about being smart and strategic on where do we want to share our ideas and for what purpose.
I think that's such an important question, actually, because it relates to, like, we're doing the research to have an impact. And to have an impact, you have to communicate what it is you're studying and finding and why it matters. I think the most important part is knowing your audience. Some research, I think, maybe isn't meant to be communicated to everybody because it's not going to be of interest or of value. And some things are actually of broad interest and value to lots of different people in lots of different ways. I think it's really important not to think about communicating to people who aren't kind of powerhouse researchers and changing your language is dumbing down the work, because it's really not. It's about expressing what you've done and what you've found in a way that explains the impact that you're going to have and why you're doing it, and what it's really about. So I think if you're talking to people in the public and its work in medical education or health sciences education, talking about how whatever education work you're doing ultimately you hope is going to improve care of patients, makes it much more meaningful and much more impactful. And that same kind of framing works for some of the granting agencies also that really want to fund work that's going to have an impact. And you might use more scientific language, but the concepts that you're going to try to explain are actually probably very much the same. Sometimes when you're talking to clinical teachers about your work, it's really about how is what I'm doing going to make your life easier and not harder? How is it that with all the 150,000 things being thrown at you, this new educational thing that we're working on is actually going to make your life simpler, less complicated, easier to achieve? And I think that's kind of in some sense the secret to communicating at that level. If you're trying to talk to administrators, sometimes it's about attaining very specific goals that relate to accreditation needs. Sometimes it's about this can save you money, this can save you time, this can be done with fewer people, just as reliably. So I think all of those are potential. So it's about, to me, I think, about thinking about what aspect of the work that you're doing is going to be most of value or interest to the person that you're talking to. And and why it would be important to them, and what piece of it is worth sharing, so that they get as excited about the work that I'm doing as I am. I'm pretty excited about the work I'm doing.
That's a good thing. You want to be excited about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm doing too many work.
But are you excited about each of them?
Yes, and that's actually why I do them.
I think the way that I think about the research lens is, and this is where I come in as a clinician, is how does this project relate to something critical within education, healthcare practice, patient outcomes? It's the why that becomes really important. Lorelei Lingard has the problem gap hook approach to things, and I think that makes entirely great sense. I think the added thing that I think about as I'm talking to research colleagues is, what's the newspaper headline for this research? What's the snippet that tells people what this is all about and what impact this will have? And I think that speaks to funders really well. I mentioned that I'm not a principal investigator for research like that, but I do sit on grant panels, and I have been adjudicating them, and really that type of perspective of, here's the one or two lines that's really going to tell you what this is all about, and start that is really, really, really important. I also think, and this is a common mistake of science educators everywhere, is that we want to talk to the world about everything we're doing in every amount of detail. And I don't think that translates out to people really well. So I think we need to be clear and concise with our messaging and be able to summarize what the research is about, so that somebody who's lay public could understand and say, okay, that's great. This is what it's all about. Ultimately, I think almost all of us don't want to be researchers just for the sake of research. We want to make a difference in how education works. We want to make a difference in how healthcare works. We want to be part of a larger conversation to move things forward. And I think we can better communicate in that conversation if we're able to synthesize our thoughts down to a tweet, down to a quick line, down to a newspaper headline, and say, this is what it's really fundamentally all about, and this sums it up. Those that are interested and want to dive deeper in research and really want to get at it will read the entire manuscript, the entire grant proposal. They will truly understand that. But if we really want to get the knowledge that we're creating into action, we've got to figure out a better way to communicate those snippets that people can understand. Speaking to funders that may not be typical, where you can get directed funding, it's got to be that elevator pitch when you're with your CEO type, quick on the way up, from the first floor to the 15th. And what can I tell you in that little piece that will help me get funding?
Are there any tips or strategies that you would recommend to do this kind of synthesis work, or to be able to really produce those snippets to communicate your research or the work that you're doing?
So I've been fortunate. Some of the research that I've worked with has been taken up by media and has had a reasonable impact. The colleagues that I worked with on that, and this was clinical research, were really insistent on, as we started, what's the story we want to tell here? What's the headline we want to tell here? How are we going to share this information? And then once we do that, how are we going to work to improve healthcare outcomes because of it? So that research was that cardiac arrest in children in hospitals, children have a lower chance of survival if they have their cardiac arrest at nighttime versus daytime. Could think about physiology, could think about any number of things, but weekend daytimes approached nighttime in a similar fashion for outcomes, and not weekday daytime. So really the story that we're trying to tell there was, because of how we deliver healthcare, outcomes are not as good at nighttime and weekends, and we need to try to do that better. And that's really the one-liner that came out with that type of work.
How do I speak to different audiences about my research or my research idea?
That's a really good question. And I'm thinking that you're considering, I mean, if I think of audiences that I have to speak to, it would range from where I'm speaking to a undergraduate or graduate class where I'm trying to recruit students, or it might be funders, or it might be a group of experts that I'm trying to recruit. And this is interesting because what I would do is an elaborate way of what I call putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And there is an elaborate way of doing it. So I use techniques from psychology called theory of mind, which is basically a very fancy way of guessing what other people would think. And so it means doing more research about where people are at, what they're doing, knowing as much about them as possible, or not necessarily personally, but what their needs are, what they want from the project, what they want to get out of things. So even if you're speaking to a funder, why should they be giving you their money? Even if they have money to spare, it's a philanthropy, it's a tax write-off, whatever reason they have, it should also make a difference to them that you care about their reason. So theory of mind would be putting yourself in that person's position and thinking with their feelings. That's not an error. That's thinking with their feelings. Connecting what their needs are and their emotions would be around why they're doing what they're doing, and relating to that in open conversation. So not just guessing and doing it with innuendo, but saying it to the person, I know you care about this, and this is how I'm going to meet your needs around that. Maybe not so graphically, but paying attention to what people want from why they should work with you. And listening with what I call a theory of, well, not what I call, it's a scientific concept, theory of mind. Making sure that you understand what is important to the other person. Because that's important in any relationship. It's important to think about even funders and audiences as relating to you in terms of a one-on-one relationship. No one's in a relationship because they want to give. I think the only thing, even a mother-child relationship, mothers get something out of being a mother. It's not a completely one-sided relationship. So it's important to think first and foremost what the other person wants. Because if you don't know that, that relationship's going to dwindle pretty soon.
Now, would your answer still stand if we were talking about communicating research findings? Is it still about knowing what your audience wants or thinking about how they would feel about this particular topic or the findings of your work? Would you argue that that communication is still the same?
Oh, absolutely. Perhaps it's more deliberate, because when we're communicating research findings, we're usually doing it in increasingly artificial ways. We're standing in front of people at a conference, we're writing it down, we're communicating or podcasts where the audience is more distant. So you have to imagine more clearly what your audience wants to know or why they would be interested. So for instance, I'm trying to formulate a paper at the moment with a colleague, and it's in a new and controversial area in medical education. It doesn't actually have an audience at the moment. So some of the things that I've done is you have to sometimes cultivate an audience, because you know that your community needs to hear something, but they're not interested in hearing it yet. So you have to, when you're creating new stuff, a lot of what I do is creating new ideas and bringing new things to medical education. You have to make it attractive and intriguing, or you have to take it to a different space, take some people with you, show them why it's interesting, and then they bring it back to this space. So one of the ways to do that is to change your platform. A few years ago, there weren't podcasts in medical education. So one of the ways in which I would attract more audiences is to change my platform. So write in a different journal, speak at a different conference, speak to in different ways. And one of the methods that I use is changing methodology. So one of the things I do is I write research poetry. So I write poetry about the research that I do. And I do it in different ways. So I might listen to people speak and then put their words together. Or I might hear something that annoys me or makes me excited, and then I just sink into the moment of feeling and write poetry about it. And that seems really odd. But the thing about poetry, for instance, it's a different medium because it's easier for people to understand. Because poetry is not something that you read on paper, but it's actually meant to be heard. Poetry is a spoken word thing. And so people understand it quicker. It's also tricky, and I don't know if I should be saying this in public, but I will. Because when you're a poet, you can say things that you wouldn't normally say as a researcher. You can be rude, you can be cheeky. Recently, I read a poem about a colleague who was put on a watch list in the United States for talking about reproductive rights and racism. And so I used a swear word in the poem. And my colleagues that I was working with, I said, well, it has to be censored. And they were like, no, don't censor it. So you couldn't use a swear word in an academic paper. So changing your platform, changing how you're saying things, looking at different audiences in different ways are the ways in which you can not just meet your audiences where they're at, but take them to a different place. And that's, I think, what I like doing is like meeting the audience and saying, do you want to go somewhere else?
How do I speak to different audiences about my research?
You try the best you can. You make many mistakes, and then you learn from your errors. Yeah, I'm quite fortunate because all the work I do is very participatory, and there's a lot of different kinds of audiences. And that wasn't part of grad school. That wasn't part of my PhD studies. It wasn't part of my training. And you learn very quickly that different groups of people, this is how I like to say it, Monica. We have 4 things that are different. Let me make sure that I remember all 4. We have different timelines, right? So what's urgent for a researcher versus a manager versus a clinician or a grad student is different. We have different reward systems and currencies, right? What matters to researchers isn't necessarily what matters to other groups. We speak different language, and I think that's what you're getting at. And we're often around the table talking about the same idea and looking at each other and saying, what did she just say? And then the 4th one is, I think I mentioned, or maybe there's 3, it's more about urgency, right? And so if we really zoom in on your question, which is how do you adapt your message? I've learned over the years that the most important thing to do is to just wear a very large humility hat and to say, no one's more important, no one is more vital to this project. And so I like to listen first to really get a sense of what the other person is telling me, the manager, the student, the clinician, etc., and to understand their own language, right? And their values usually really come through the language. And we try, because I do a lot of integrated participatory or integrated knowledge translation work, I get them involved from very early in the process. And so if I'm building that trust and that relationship from the onset, they will slowly begin to tell me, if you come to a meeting and you tell clinicians about this, they're not going to be responsive. And so one thing that's important to know about me is that I am a clinician myself. So I sort of wear that title on my heart, right? And so I'm very well aware of the realities of the clinicians, even though I'm not practicing anymore. But I've learned to tailor the message. When you're speaking to clinicians, you're talking to them and you're emphasizing and valuing the benefits for patient care. And you are putting value on their well-being. You're putting a lot of emphasis on agency when you're working with clinicians who are self-regulated professionals. So I try to tailor the message around that, right? How can we do work that allows you to maintain your agency, help you with your decision-making, not disempower you from that? And how do you give cutting-edge clinical services and interventions? So I think it's about, I'm going to get really fancy, but I know you get this. It's about them being all different epistemic communities. And when I understand what each epistemic community knows, what their values are, then I try to tailor the message to that. When I'm speaking to managers, it's about cost. It's about efficiency. It's about discharge. It's about getting people home. It's about no revolving doors, right? It's about showing rehab matters, right? But it's also very different when I'm talking to educators and all the OT programs in Canada. What matters, right? Cutting edge education, clinical competencies, making sure we are graduating competent, person-centered, evidence-informed clinicians. And so I am very fortunate. I didn't say this at the beginning, but I have a Canada Research Chair in Education, Practice, and Policy for Evidence-Based Healthcare. And I think I designed and submitted my program of research with those sectors together because I eventually literally walking in circles, I believe, in my bedroom and saying, why can we not simply get along? Why do we not speak the same language? And then I said, boom. I know, super sophisticated term, epistemic communities, but we are, and we have different logics. And so if we can understand each other and try to have a little bit more of a common language, maybe we could achieve better things together. So I've learned to tailor the content and the delivery of what I say to different groups.
So Karen, what did you think?
Being an educator, it was nice to see that all of the conversation included the ABCs. And for research, I'm thinking of audience before content. So we want to probably understand our audience because your impact probably starts with your understanding that comes up later. And things you should do, language you should use. Don't get too fancy. Use words that people understand in their community or the community of practice so that you can become one of the insiders so people will actually hear what you're saying. And it signals that you value probably the relationship with your audience and that you understand their problem, their gaps, their norms, and their expectations. So they sort of might open up to you more and listen to you a little bit more than if you didn't. Another thing is that they explained what not to do. Don't bog everybody down with tons and tons of detail. You might obscure your very important concept that you want to get across. You want to talk about the value you're going to add, how that is going to help make things better for your audience. And if it's worth the return on their investment to listen to you and to try and implement what you want to share with them as new information. And finally, location for dissemination. So if your audience isn't entirely ready to adopt the new idea, you can cultivate maybe a subset of them, use a train-the-trainer strategy, go to a new neighborhood like social media or podcasts, things we didn't traditionally think of using. And show up in new ways where people are looking and what they're looking for, infographics, or maybe a new methodology like poetry or something like that. And I think that's how you can get seen and heard. And finally, I think one of the things you could do is invite your audience into your world of health sciences, education, research, and have them be part of the journey in implementing your ideas.
I think those are all really great insights. And I think the first thing you said is particularly important, that even as researchers, we've all gone through multiple levels of education, but it still comes back to knowing your ABCs.
True enough. True enough.
I know it's almost a little bit catchphrasy, but with that, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Ask 5. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thank you. And to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you catch the next episode of Ask 5. Eggplant.
I like it, but I don't like the texture. It's too slippery.
You don't like the texture of it either?
Yeah.
Don't you want to look cool, Carlos?
No, I'm not cool.
That's okay.
Cool, don't.
I know.
It's my voice. Sorry.
No.
Okay, so I keep looking at you.
Yes, you don't have to look at the cameras at all.
That's why I was trying to understand what you want from my life. SOS.
Everybody gets this, so.
That's what I tried to do when you said it was too much.
I know, right?
I literally did this, right?
I know. Right?
All right. No, that's not allowed.
While you answer. I'm
I
kidding.
feel offended. It's okay.
Have a little chichi nana. How do you handle rejection?
You're talking about when women tell me that I'm not that attractive and that I'm
Yes.
going to start that one again. Let's go back. You're cutting all of that, I hope.
You got that soothing voice going.
You got the soothing voice? Thank you. I've got my Barry White going.
I'm going to leave it there.
Sure.
That's it.
Thank you.
No problem at all. You did wonderful. That's the whole experience here.